STL Angular Meetup. This is the reboot. And so I don't think anyone here has met me yet. I'm Paul Spears. I work at Oasis Digital. And Josh Godai used to run this meetup, but he's now living out in the valley, so he will not be running the meetup anymore. I don't think he could stomach that commute. So he reached out to us. We knew him through working together on Angular Bootcamp. So he reached out to us and said, I think you guys do a great job. Let me hook you up to kind of take over and lead things out from there. And so here we are. So thank you for coming. I know we got some folks online. And then tonight we're doing, obviously, a panel. And I'll let you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves. Start here.
My name is Ryland. I'm a developer on the Clarity UI team at VMware. I actually live here locally in St. Louis. I'm also a Google developer expert for Angular, and I help with the Angular Bootcamp classes.
Ryland, I didn't know you were over there.
Should we have Bonnie be between you two?
Corey!
Yeah. Oh, okay. Have Bonnie be between you two, because that's where she is in order.
Okay.
Go, Bonnie.
Floor is yours, Bonnie. And
hello, I'm Bonnie. I'm from Texas. I run Ng Houston, and we have a YouTube channel as well. And I'm also a panelist on Angular Air every week, and I'm an Angular GDE. And that's my clock.
Awesome, thank you.
So, hello everybody, my name is Jack Balbus. I am a developer at Oasis Digital along with Paul and Kyle, and I'm also an instructor with Angular Bootcamp.
Hey, I'm Kyle Cordes. As has been mentioned, I'm yet another developer and also, in fact, a founder at Oasis Digital, where we teach Angular Bootcamp. So we are like super incredibly ridiculously into Angular, so much so that this is one of 2 Angular meetups we sponsor. That's how into Angular we are. So.
All right, awesome. So tonight, again, we're talking about the state of Angular in 2019. And to kick things off, the first question I want to talk about, kind of topic I want to talk about, is actually about Google. So I know, obviously, no one here is an employee at Google, but through some of the relationships and the connections that we've made there, we've gotten to know quite a few of the developers on the Angular team. And so based on that, like, what is your perspective on the continued importance of Angular to Google? And Bonnie, we'll go ahead and start with you, since you're kind of the looming presence over the screen here.
I think, yeah, because it was about 2 weeks ago at NG Atlanta. Brad Green was talking about, Angular at Google, and they're using Angular all over Google. It's not the only language that they're using, but they are using it extensively. So it's definitely not going anywhere anytime soon.
Okay. And then whoever here wants to chime in, just pass the mic.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's pretty obviously true. I mean, they've said before that, if the whole rest of the world stopped using Angular, it would still be being worked on by Google. So I don't think that they're planning on changing that anytime soon.
I can add a comment. So we follow, of course, Angular stuff really closely, but we also try to follow the web platform as a whole. And Google's teams loom large over much of the web platform, for obvious reasons, Chrome and so on. And it's interesting that Angular is this huge important thing to Google, but they're actually so big, they have so many bright people working on so many other things, that they have other, like, not quite competing because they're kind of in different niches, but they have other things that are sort of candidates to be like solving the same kinds of problems. So you can actually adopt multiple different strongly Google-supported technologies across the web platform, depending on the shape of your problem. That's pretty cool.
Great, thanks. All right, so up next, I actually wanted to talk about TypeScript. So let me go ahead and make sure I'm running this thing here. There it is, thank you. All right, so in TypeScript, there seems to be a huge surge of developers that have suddenly decided 2019, this is the year I'm going to learn TypeScript. And so my first question there would be, what do you think is causing that surge? What's leading that? Why would people suddenly pick that up?
Well, my conjecture would be Angular, really. So, prior to Angular version 2, right, it was relatively common to not use anything on top of JavaScript, right? You were developing a web application or something for the web, and you would use just plain JavaScript. And there were things you could do, like TypeScript was around at the time, I believe, and you could like use things like CoffeeScript, but Angular being TypeScript first really, I think, is pushing people to say, oh, well, you know, I don't necessarily like Angular, but I'm trying out Angular and I like TypeScript, and I can use TypeScript really easily with other frameworks, and so maybe I'll pick up TypeScript but not Angular. So people who are trying, you know, Angular are also by default trying out TypeScript, and maybe people are liking TypeScript more than they're liking Angular over time.
I think a big factor over the past year or two has been the tooling around TypeScript has really matured. For library authors, it kind of just makes sense to use TypeScript, especially for the consumers of those libraries. If you use VS Code, even if you're writing in JavaScript, it can consume that type information from the NPM packages. So even if you're using vanilla JavaScript, there's a...
Oh no!
We lost you, Bonnie.
Poor Bonnie.
My head.
We'll be pausing for technical difficulties. So the tooling's matured. So even if you use vanilla JavaScript, there's a good chance you might be indirectly using TypeScript in some fashion. So as more and more library authors use TypeScript, it gets easier to use TypeScript as just a consumer building web apps. Because early on in TypeScript, one of the biggest pain points of using it was you would consume a third-party library and it wouldn't have any types, and TypeScript would try to do all this type checking, and you get all this crazy nonsense with types. And I think a lot of that pain has kind of evaporated quite a bit.
When I first started, am I frozen? No, I'm not frozen. When I first started development, TypeScript wasn't out yet, right? And all the cool kids were the back end, the C# and the Java and all that kind of stuff. And JavaScript wasn't really taken too seriously. It was like the Wild West, and you could do all kinds of crazy stuff, and there wasn't any accountability. And then when, you know, Node.js and Angular came out and some of the frameworks started to show up, then we started building bigger and bigger applications, and then all of a sudden we had accountability, and we kind of needed the structure. And so TypeScript, I think, offers that structure, and it's more restrictive, and so it kind of takes a little bit to get used to, but because it's more restrictive, it actually ends up being cleaner and simpler in the long run. And so I think that's why TypeScript is getting more popular, because JavaScript has gone into the, you know, more business logic, bigger applications, and that's why I think we needed that structure, you know, like we had with the backend languages.
Awesome, thanks. All right, so,
So I was just curious. I had to stall for time so I could do a quick search. So I have an immense sense of timing. I gave a talk in 2015 that now was the time for TypeScript. And so I think only about 4 years off. I think it's now obvious that I'm 4 years off of being right. Yeah, just the industry adoption and momentum we're seeing now is just fantastic. And I mean, it'd be great for Angular to take credit for that. But I think it's actually spread far beyond Angular. And of course, it started before Angular. But where we've seen the biggest impact is people coming into the JavaScript world. If they're coming from, I think Paul's told me this, like coming from Java or C#, they feel so welcome. And so I think TypeScript has enabled the kind of front-end world to become a lot more welcoming to like the broader community of developers. And that's really fantastic.
So the structure's more intuitive. I tried to teach AngularJS to .NET developers back in like 2013, 2014. They were hostile. They did not like it at all. But then when I came back with TypeScript and it was like that MVC architecture that they were used to, it was a whole lot easier to swallow. Yeah. We were country when country wasn't cool, Kyle.
I think another factor is Microsoft being really involved with open source. I think recently, I don't remember the details, but I believe TypeScript said they'll be working much closer with ESLint.
They're switching.
Yeah, they're switching.
All in on ESLint. Yep.
Yeah, so TypeScript the team working much closer to the JavaScript community as a whole is going to help drive that adoption.
excellent. And so what what effect, if any, do you think this will have on possibly driving traffic back to Angular now that, TypeScript's no longer going to be necessarily the big hurdle? Because when we first taught classes, a lot of students would come in and they'd say, well, maybe Angular, but I don't know about this TypeScript. So do you think this will actually have any effect on that?
What's Bonnie think? I have no idea.
I love TypeScript. I don't know what they're talking about. I really, it was something that I had to learn, but once I learned it, I really don't want to write plain JavaScript. Once I learned TypeScript, especially once I learned like Angular 2 and beyond, it's much more fun for me to write TypeScript. It's clean. I like clean, I don't like messy code, and the TypeScript is just very regimented and clean, and it's nice. I like it. I like it. Tell them I said it's better.
I think TypeScript, as it gets more adopted, it's going to help people feel more comfortable across all JavaScript frameworks, not just Angular. Because as a whole, the front end's kind of coalescing around common ideas, like static analysis is a good thing, TypeScript is a good thing, component-based architecture is a good thing, and all these frameworks are starting to look more and more similar, and it's coming down to kind of syntax preferences. So it may not drive a ton of traffic to Angular, but everyone's going to feel a little bit more comfortable jumping between frameworks.
Excellent. Out of curiosity, anyone in here not like TypeScript? Because I know about half the room was already using Angular. No one's got any beef with TypeScript. All right, everyone's sold. They're convinced.
So I've got a bit on TypeScript. So you sometimes, it's easy to look at TypeScript and think, oh, look, this is more complex, right? Is this going to be slower? But of course, since it is compile time only and it evaporates completely at runtime, you could argue, oh, it's actually free at runtime. But for the people that are really doing hardcore optimization, trying to get the smallest possible bundle and so on, it turns out that type information makes it possible to produce a smaller running output. So as we move toward, mobile apps and like the next billion users on phones that are not, the brand new Pixel or whatever, TypeScript is actually very helpful to make smaller, faster loading things. Even, so it's not only free, it's like better than free. You actually get a smaller result, even though it's a more powerful tool to input.
Yeah, so to riff off of what both you and Corey said, I think that increasingly, supporting TypeScript or something like it is going to become something like table stakes for any kind of front-end framework. So I don't know that will necessarily drive people back to Angular specifically, but...
Okay. All right, so next up, I want to talk a little bit about Angular and their versioning systems. So
Angular
first
and
thing,
what?
though, is it seems that the team has actually held really good on their promises of, like, hey, we want to provide continuous updates and effectively communicate anytime we have a breaking change. And they really seem to have heard the message when they jumped from AngularJS to Angular, and are really holding true to that. And so do you expect that we'll see more of that in 2019, or are they going to surprise us and shake things up?
So I think it's important to point out that the only reason that there was so much of a shakeup between AngularJS and Angular is because they thought that they had the room to do that, and that they didn't really have that large of a user base outside of Google, or at least that's what they thought. And so I think that they've been sufficiently burned by that they're going to remember that and not repeat the same mistake again. So I don't think that they're going to be, doing anything wild and crazy with their versioning system in the future.
Another thing to keep in mind with Angular and their versioning system, if they decide to break something with Angular, change an API, it's on the Angular team to go around to the hundreds of internal Google apps and go fix all of them. So they're very hesitant to make those changes because they have to go fix everything they just broke. So I think stability is pretty important.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of really any open source sizable thing, that's under active development that has such an obvious, is extreme the right word? Like obsessive dedication to Semver and backward compatibility. I mean, if you looked up Semver and backward compatibility in a dictionary, it really should have a picture of the Angular team there as an example. But if you've been kind of following their progress, there's this new Ivy thing coming on the way in. And it's going to enable many kinds of innovation once it's all the way complete. And so although I can't imagine they'll ever ship a thing called Angular that violently breaks compatibility like ever again, I think we're going to start more extreme innovation coming up in the next few years. Not even few years, the next year and a half out of Angular. Ivy's looking pretty good, and I think once it ships, it's going to get interesting.
It's crazy because we've been waiting forever for Ivy, or it seems like we've been waiting forever because we've been so excited about Ivy. But the reason why it's taking so long is because it's going to be completely backward compatible. So you can use Ivy as soon as it comes out without refactoring your code, which I love. And it's just going to, and they're working so hard to make that happen because they could have released it a long time ago, except it would have had breaking changes. And so basically they're having to go back and reverse engineer all this stuff to make sure that you guys don't have to refactor. So I love that. And also the CLI add update that's come out, I think in version 6 is kind of amazing. So that's something that makes it much easier to update going forward. So they have really put a lot of thought into this stuff and come a long way.
Excellent. So we keep our Angular curriculum on a pretty tight leash. Like we keep an eye out on what's going on with Angular, and we keep it up to date with latest version of Angular, update anything that's changed. And for the last 6 months to a year, somewhere in there, that process has kind of gotten pretty automated and almost boring to kind of find out what's new with Angular. And so it kind of feels like that we might be starting to see some slowdown. Like, do you guys see any of that? Or is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. I think that there's a lot of change coming, but it's kind of the underlying plumbing that's not going to breaking changes. That's just going to enable that innovation Kyle mentioned. So it might seem a little slow right now, but it's just the team's trying to kind of prepare things, get things smoothed out, so people can build on top of the Angular.
So I just updated, I think, 50 programs, 50 small example programs today to compile on Angular 7.2.2, I think. And I made a few small edits. None of them were breaking changes. They were just because the lint tooling keeps getting better. So to satisfy a picky lint tool, I made minor edits. So that's how stable it is, right? It's like really, really stable. But Paul flashed a slide up. I don't know if it made it on.
We'll come back to that slide too. Yeah,
but I think there's actually been a huge amount of activity in the last couple of years. It's just that most of the visible changes have been across that entire slide instead of in the little box labeled Angular. So I mean, we're seeing a lot of progress on this ecosystem, even though Angular itself is like surprisingly stable.
Yeah, and that was pretty much my next question. I'll go ahead and show that slide. Bonnie, you're just going to have to pretend, but this is a slide from Brad Green's keynote. And so he was up on stage at Angular Mix presenting, talking about Angular and things to come. This was some time ago now. But the slide itself, what's so interesting about this slide is that there are all these icons that represent kind of like the different facets of Angular. And so Angular itself, it has integrations with things like internationalization. It has test tooling built around it for both end-to-end and unit testing. It has support for browser tooling with Augury, progressive web app support. It has the CLI, elements, so on and so forth. So there's all these different integration points. That being said, what do you expect to see this year, like from the point of view on this picture? Like, do we expect to see this picture continue to grow, to take on more integrations, or focus on the stories of what we already have?
It's already outdated. There's no Bazel.
Yeah.
Bazel has an icon. I think Ivy has an icon too.
I think there's a newer version of that slide
already.
On a more recent talk. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, actually, because he was, because I have his slides. Well, the slide I think is the same, but I have his slides from NG Atlanta, which was like 2 weeks ago. And there's so much. So I know the CDK. I'm really excited about the CDK because it's got some really cool functionality. And there are some things that I was trying to do, kind of advanced. I'm trying to get a table to use the CDK table and virtual scroll at the same time, which I did get it working. But the thing is, the whole material team is working on Ivy. And then there's a lot going on with Basil. You guys know about co-design?
Tell us about it.
Co-design is, but I don't think that's up there. I don't think there's I don't know if there's an icon for it yet.
What is it?
Co-design?
Tell us about it.
Let me see if well, okay, it's not my slide, it's Brad Green's slide, but let me see if I can share this. Let me put it over here. Share this with you. And put this up here. This down here. Can I share my screen for a second?
Should be able to, yeah. Should just work.
Which one is it? Can you see this?
It's on its way. Yeah.
You see the pink and the blue moving?
Yep.
So basically, this is like, I'm trying to see if I can present this interview. Let me see.
See if I can do anything here.
Sorry, okay, that did not help. Where'd it go? Okay, so basically, it's like Sketch, right? This is the Google Cloud Platform thing that they've been working on for a while. It's a living design spec, and it's got an interactive GUI. And then teams can share this, and basically you just click around and you pick out all your different elements, and you can store them in there and share them and pass them around, and it just shows you. Can you see the GIF okay with the switching from pink to blue?
Yeah, so what we're looking at, if you can't see it in the back, it's showing a couple of different swatches that'll let you pick between your primary and accent colors and an Angular material theme. Does it have anything other than the colors, or does it support things like your border radius and stuff like that?
Does it support things like what?
Like border radius?
Oh, yeah. Over on the right, it's got size, it's got background, images, padding, layout, main axis cross. I mean, it's got all these different CSS parameters in a GUI, right? So you're going to click around, and this is nice because it's not just your developers. You can actually pass this back and forth with your design team, get everybody on the same page using this tool, which is beautiful. I think they're already starting to use it. The Google Cloud Platform has been working on this, but this is something that there is actually, if you go to the Angular blog, there is an article about this, and I can tweet this article after we're done here, and you guys can retweet it if you want.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Anyone else got
Yeah, it's very
anything?
cool.
Or I think Bonnie wins on that question. She's got interactive demo and everything. Anything else that you see coming for integration?
It wasn't my slide. It was Brad's slide. I just stole it from Brad's presentation. But he did a whole talk about that, and that was part of the talk. I don't know if he talked about that at Angular Mix, but I don't think that the NG Atlanta video is up yet. Otherwise, I would have just linked you guys to it.
I got a couple words on your previous slide you had up, though. So, yeah, that's a really impressive slide, and we found out that it's already obsolete. There's already like at least 2 more icons that should be on there. I feel like the competition, to the extent there is one, it's a very friendly competition among all the things like Angular, is in the process of elevating away from like who has a slightly different syntax for making a component and toward like what platform brings the most amazing gigantic array of out-of-the-box capabilities. And, so Angular's looking real strong there. I know that Vue, there's a whole bunch of stuff around Vue. There's quite a bit around React. It's been building up a while, but I think companies just now entering this space won't be comparing like component building tool to component building tool. They'll be comparing like ecosystem of supported tools to ecosystem of supported tools. So it's getting to be a very high stakes, big investment space to be in.
Can I speak to that? And actually, it's just like you said, because I was talking to, Manfred Stair just made that, what was that NPM package, NGX Build Plus, which is like an extension. It's like adds some functionality to the Angular CLI without having to eject. And it's a really great little NPM package. And I was talking to him a couple weeks ago in Atlanta, and he said he actually looked at Vue because Vue had this functionality that he really liked and Angular didn't. And so he went and looked at the Vue source code and ported it over into Angular. And I've heard the same thing about, people are looking at React or there's some other thing that does some cool thing. Let's go figure out how to make Angular do that. And they're not, and there's no shame in it, right? It's like, hey, this is cool. And I would use something that Kyle wrote and say like, hey, Kyle wrote this really cool thing and I'm going to use it and I'm going to, give him a shout out and let people know. But there's no shame in that. I mean, we all share and collaborate. That's one of the things I love about the Angular community. And it's a great thing for everybody moving forward, which also Bazel, right? Bazel is a big one that's coming out with this Bazel build platform that's basically trying to get it universal across all the different languages, all the different platforms to do it exactly the same way with this Bazel build, and it's a beautiful thing. So yeah, I agree with Kyle.
Excellent. All right, one more question on versions and integrations, and that is, are we finally past the Angular 1 JS, Angular 2 thing yet? Like, is that still going to keep haunting us this year? Or like, can we finally start Googling for Angular things and find the thing we want?
It will still haunt us. Because I Googled yesterday for, I don't know, some question on Stack Overflow, and AngularJS still pops up in the Google search. Nice. So, yeah, top of the list. So, unfortunately, I think it's going to be stuck for a while until it drops off of Google, which might be forever. But I don't know. As more Angular content comes out, that'll kind of push the older content down, hopefully.
All right.
So, yeah, it's going to be with us forever. Firstly, yeah, the old stuff appears at the top of a lot of searches on Google, and that's on Google. Google has the most advanced search engine in terms of understanding semantics. If you step off into some of the other competing search engines, as I sometimes do, they have actually considerably more mixing of JS and Angular content. Further, commercially, like our experience commercially is that, internally we think of AngularJS as being years ago, but there's a wave underway right now of companies that have made big investments, big teams, big projects in AngularJS that are just now in 2019 looking at considering moving up to Angular. So you'll be asking that question at a panel in 2025, definitely.
That's a shame.
See, I think I have a different approach and kind of a harsh approach, right? Because I feel like AngularJS, when I switched over from AngularJS to Angular, it's so much nicer and so much faster and so much cleaner. There's so much functionality available out of the box that isn't there in AngularJS. It's so much better that I don't think there's any excuse to use AngularJS. And I know that's probably too harsh, but the thing is, it is possible if you have an AngularJS app that's stable and completed, then yeah, leave it alone, right? But if there's any ongoing development at all going on with your app, you should not be writing any new AngularJS at this point. That's what I'm just going to say it. You should not, right? If you have this big app and you don't want to let it go because you pumped all this work into it, then make it a hybrid app, and then everything new that you touch, or if you fix any bugs or add any features, everything going forward should be Angular 2 and above. But I think any company that is still actively doing AngularJS at this point is, in my opinion, they're just not, like, they don't want to retrain all their people, but it's basically obsolete at this point. So to me, using AngularJS in active development right now is like driving on the freeway with your hazard lights on, like, come on, get off the bleeding edge if you're not going to stay on the, yeah. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Is that too harsh?
Do you have something, Jack?
So I have a little admission. So we actually have a little bit of AngularJS code hanging around.
Yeah, but are you active? Is it an active development? If it's
it is not really an active development, no.
Yeah, if it's a stable app and it's good and you like it the way it is, that's different than leave it. You don't need to go refactor it just because it's shameful, you know. But if you're actively developing it, that's when you should at least hybrid the app, right? So that you can make the active new features in Angular too.
It's not Marie Kondo. We don't have to throw it out, right?
Right.
Go ahead, Jack.
No, I was just saying that, I mean, it is useful because it basically allows us to, like, if we have a mostly static page, we can inject just a little bit of AngularJS, and that's what we were using it before. So there's not like enough to justify, oh, we want to go and like replace it with something Angular because then we have to make the whole page Angular.
So what you're telling me is that we're the baddies, and the reason AngularJS continues to go up.
I mean, I guess.
Well, yeah, but see, you guys are very, very, very good at staying up with the latest cutting edge, everything. I mean, you guys are like some of the most cutting edge people I know. So you guys get a pass.
I'd like to point out she's the only one on the panel who does not teach Angular Bootcamp. So, and why is that? Anyway, so let's talk more about. Yeah, there you go. Let's talk more about the various libraries out there. So, looking strictly at the numbers, Angular is trailing React in the front-end framework space, but all the major frameworks are still gaining active users. So, should we expect that trend to continue in 2019, or will the numbers shift in some way? Why? And please be nice.
I have an answer for that, but I'm going to let you guys go first. But it's not nice. No, I'm just kidding. Corey's definitely going to be nice.
I think the numbers will continue to trend the way they are. Angular will continue to grow. React will continue to grow. I don't think anything's going to be slowing down anytime soon. I think it's going to come down to just use cases, what your company needs, what works for your team. I think there's going to be maybe more diversity in the frameworks, new ideas coming about. So.
Yeah, I mean, basically what Corey said, I don't think that, like, until the next, wave of ideas comes along to shake things up, I don't know that there's going to be, like, a big immigration from one framework to another. But Bonnie's already pointed out, there's a lot of cross-pollination of ideas between the frameworks already. So anything that one of the frameworks does to kind of, like, get an advantage, it's very rapidly adopted into the other communities, if not officially, then unofficially through various means. So we've already seen that happen before, and I have every confidence that it's going to happen again. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with everyone that we're probably going to be on the same path for 2019, but I also think there's some kind of paradigm shift coming at some point. Like our great-grandchildren are not going to be debating whether they should be using Angular or Vue for their next web app, right? And I feel like we're getting to the point nearly of maturity in this space and these kind of platforms, right? We see a big, broad platform with lots of well-supported tools. They work together, and your IDE works the first day. You should feel a positive feeling that, hey, we've reached maturity, and that's great. But that means you should also be looking for the next, innovation. And probably not in 2019, but sometime in the next few years, somebody's going to come out with something, and it's going to be, explosively different. It's going to be something that really makes, a serious move forward in how we build apps. And, one thing will come out first, and it'll kind of fumble a little bit, but then another one will come out and so on. So at some point, our apple cart is going to be disrupted again, and we're going to step back to a new round of fundamentally more abstract but less mature tools. So I think we should enjoy this time we're in right now of competing, amazing, polished, mature tools, because this is not the permanent state of our industry. It's not how our industry works in the long term.
So I would speak to the whole popularity contest, right? Am I frozen?
Yeah, we can hear you though.
I can hear you fine.
Okay. Well, you just can't. I'm just not moving. I was like, I don't think I'm moving. I would speak to the whole popularity contest, right? With the different, Angular versus React versus Vue, and which one's more downloaded. And this is just totally my opinion, right? But I think React is really a lot easier, and even Vue. You can get your hello world and get up and running very, very, very quickly with React. And I think that's going to be, really, that's going to make it more popular. A lot more companies are using React. A lot more developers are learning React because it's so easy. And Angular has more of a steep learning curve. It's more complicated, right? But it's also more powerful. So in the long run, when you're looking at enterprise development and big companies that are going to scale into big applications, really Angular is the way to go because it's so opinionated that there is really a right way and a wrong way. Whereas React, if you've got a large company and everybody's doing React, you can do React any way you want, right? And it's probably going to work because it's very loosey-goosey and it's great. So I think they both have their pros and cons, but in the long run, the Angular team is working so hard to make Angular easier and easier and easier every year. The docs have come a long way. The build systems have come a long way. They're doing all this collaboration and just the whole, tooling infrastructure around Angular is that only drawback of Angular has been that steep learning curve, right? It's hard, which is cool for us because the Angular developers are like the elite cool kids, right? Making the big bucks because it's hard. But I think over time, it's going to continue to get easier and easier. So that will bring down the only disadvantage. And the thing is, it's still going to be more powerful, in my opinion. So I think it's going to continue to be more popular.
Excellent.
Not that it's more popular. It will become more popular. I don't think it's more popular now. But I think over time it will be.
All right. Now, Bonnie, I know we're starting to run over a little bit on how long I asked you to stay. So I want to try and ask a couple more questions here and try and get wrapped up. So let's go ahead and jump to education. And so in particular, let's actually jump all the way to this question. For people learning Angular in 2019 for the first time, so junior developers switching to Angular from another platform, any words of advice? Anything they should be aware of starting down this path?
Make sure whatever educational material you're looking at for Angular does not say AngularJS.
Nice.
I would say focus on like the basics because there's a lot of rabbit holes you can get yourself into trying to figure out how everything works, and just looking at like making your own basic components is probably the best way to just get started. And like don't even worry about all that other stuff because that will come in time. And stick to learning fundamentals at first. So.
I mean, so I can't help but plug the class that several of us teach. If you have the budget, you should go to Angular Bootcamp, and that's how you should learn it. But more broadly, though, I can't agree enough with Jack's thing that you need to like learn the important parts very, very deeply. And that means not just Angular, but RxJS. Like spend serious time studying and deeply understanding like a reactive view of the world with RxJS. I think we found that as you move up in the sophistication of what you're doing with Angular, that just pays off again and again. Not all of the things that were on the slide rely heavily on RxJS, but most of them do in some important way. So.
All right. Well, again, we're running.
So I would.
Oh, go ahead.
Don't skip me, man. This is a good one.
All right. Do it.
Okay, so if you cannot afford Angular Bootcamp, I would strongly recommend Deborah Carrata on Pluralsight because she's amazing, especially if you want like a comprehensive beginner. She's really good. The thing is, when it comes to paying for training, I know Angular Bootcamp is not that cheap, right? But you're going to learn so much faster and kind of shove it all into one condensed week that you're basically going to jump from junior to senior developer like that. And when you think about spending the money to do that, you're investing in your own career, and I promise you, you're going to make more money. So whether it's, I mean, the thing is, the training that you're going to get, that you're going to pay for, if you're learning off YouTube, which don't get me wrong, right? I learned a lot of things off YouTube, and I learned off of YouTube a long, long time. But your time is valuable. And so if you spend a whole day watching weird YouTube videos that completely confuse you and they're not even right, how much is your time worth? So if you're gonna, if you think about paying for training, you're paying for more reputable, like they've got all their ducks in a row before they start teaching you because they're held accountable, right? Because that's money. But the other thing is, and I know this is gonna seem really weird, y'all just go with me on this, right? I actually was learning Angular for a very long time by myself, and just learning from the internet and YouTube and tutorials. As soon as I started participating in the community and actually talking to other people, talking to strangers, which was really out of my comfort zone. I really did not want to talk to strangers, and I really didn't want to ask stupid questions on the internet, right? I really was not comfortable with that. And the only reason I started a meetup was because I was looking for somebody smarter than me because I was so confused, right? But the thing is, I want you guys to think about, and I know this might sound crazy, right? But think about coming up here and teaching, because I tell you, it is absolutely the best way to learn. If you're teaching and you're getting involved in the meetup community and starting to actually write blog posts, I know you might not be comfortable with that, and that might just seem like crazy talk to you, but I started learning Angular so much faster, and my career progressed so much faster as soon as I started participating in the community. And it was out of my comfort zone. It really did make me very nervous and uncomfortable, but I really quickly got used to it. The Angular community is so warm, and so consider that really, that's like I know I'm going over, but I mean, that's a real thing about it. Come and talk to Paul if you want to give a talk, and you don't have to be an expert to give a talk. Actually, some of the best teachers are beginners, believe it or not.
Absolutely.
So advice is talk to Paul. That's the essence.
All right, well, Bonnie, before we let you go, I want to give the audience a chance. Anyone here have any questions? If so, please raise your hand. I'll come around with a mic. That way they can hear us on the live stream. Yeah, if you don't mind. It's off right now.
So this goes a little bit back to one of the things you guys talked about in terms of popularity, in terms of the different applications, and React versus Vue versus Angular generally. And I wanted to ask for a little bit more details on that, specifically because the more I talk to other developers, the more it seems like React is getting a lot more popular. And in some ways I can understand from a business perspective, because from learning Angular and seeing people who learned Angular from different aspects, whether it was a junior developer starting to learn Angular or a developer that had been developing for 10 years that learned Angular, it seems what happens very commonly is they learn it because their company wants them to, and they want to do a very specific thing, which requires them to not first look at all the fundamentals and instead look for something very specific. And the application becomes this horrible, like, awful thing where because they didn't understand certain things, it gets rough. And that makes me kind of fear in that basically what I wanted to ask is in a more honest way, how much more do you think React is gaining in terms of popularity for different companies than Angular? Because it seems like React is a lot more popular, at least in St. Louis, in terms of talking to people that are actually using the framework.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and answer that because it's my favorite question, and I want to answer that. So, in terms of what should I invest in? You're going to have a safe bet with either one. Like, you'll find good paying jobs with either one. It's not going to be a problem. There was an article I read just yesterday. I can't remember the author. I think you, Lance, you may have actually sent the link out. But there are actually roughly the exact number of jobs up for both Angular and React as of last month across the board, like on all the major job sites. So if you're looking at just like numbers of like who needs work done, they're about the same. But yes, React is very much winning in the numbers of popularity in terms of what tools the developers love working with. And I think the reason is very, very obvious. Bonnie stated it pretty clearly. It's that, yeah, React's a whole lot easier to get started with. But the reason why for any non-trivial enterprise grade solution, I'm usually going to pick Angular is because of this slide right here. It's because of the fact that Angular was meant to solve 160 different problems at Google as opposed to 1 or 2 at Facebook. It was built with, solving enterprise solutions in mind from the ground up across large teams, scaling in performance and maintainability. Those are just fundamental core tenets of Angular. And now React, they can get there. There's no doubt in my mind that they can get there. They're just not there today. And so with the rise in popularity of React, they may have a refocus on that, but the direction they're taking today, it's just not a match for the kind of development I'm doing. Again, back to raw numbers and who's building what. Again, React's better for your small things. By the numbers, there are more small things than big things. And so, yeah, you're going to see more React developers. You're going to see more React apps. But, one really large Angular app, any of the small apps. So, to me, it's still, in terms of what the frameworks are capable of, both of them can get you there. It's just what kind of work are you wanting to do? That's my opinion. I think, did you have a question in the back real quick? We can come back to that in just a second, though. No? All right, go ahead.
So I'm really struggling less with the basic fundamental questions and more with the what is the proper way to be setting this up and what is the proper way to be doing this kind of questions. And I'm kind of wondering, where do you guys, obviously you guys don't need to go Google those questions probably as much, but what are your favorite resources to recommend for those? Because for somebody in the position where I walked in on an application that was set up very wrong, as somebody that didn't know Angular, I took the job as, hey, I can go learn Angular. And so I'm learning Angular while trying to fix a very broken Angular application. And so, it's where my questions are things like, hey, how are these modules supposed to be talking to each other? Because, hey, a module needs to be exporting a component in order for other modules to be able to see that component. Don't just shove everything into the shared module. Those are the kinds of things that I'm trying to find, but I don't know where to go. But those questions are really not specific enough for somewhere like Stack Overflow. Yeah.
Do you mind getting that mic over to Kyle? And Kyle, would you mind do you mind saying a few words on governance?
Yeah. I realized I was going to have the mic thrown at me. Yeah, so that is a hard problem, right? And so first I can just sort of plug our thing again. So we actually pay our bills because a lot of people have that problem. And people have that problem actually across all the tools. That's not an Angular thing. That's a whatever I'm using. When I start having a group of people building a thing at scale, I end up having a random chaotic exploration of the solution space, right? And then eventually you start wondering what on earth am I supposed to do? What is the right way to do this? Paul threw, there's this word governance, which seems to be getting a lot of popularity recently. That's sort of the high and mighty word to use, figuring that stuff out, but ignoring the fancy word. Well, you really need to be part of a community of practice, and you need to have tooling to help kind of, put some guardrails. In terms of community of practice, well, that's kind of what Paul's trying to make happen right here, right? And so this relaunch is a panel, but I imagine there's probably going to be a lot of talks coming up to help with those kind of problems in specific areas over time. So keep coming and bring your team, is the first step. We also have, Paul hopefully will plug, we have a lunchtime, we have an Angular lunch that we're trying to get more advanced topics in there for the harder problems. But as part of that community of practice, get to know and participate and talk with a lot of different people that are using these tools. And although there are hazards that Bonnie pointed out, watch a talk from a conference on YouTube every week. And a year later, you've now watched 4 conferences worth of relatively sophisticated materials. And everything I just said is not Angular specific. Other than that, the group of us here are relatively Angular specific. So if you were using React, I would actually give the same answer, but with React plugged in.
Can I add to that?
Yes,
I
please.
can't see you guys anymore, but. What?
Go ahead.
No? Okay, okay. So I didn't hear the whole question, but I heard something about working on an application that's already big and it's already got all this code and trying to kind of reverse engineer it. Is that right? Is that what we're talking about?
Mostly trying to understand the right way to be doing Angular in an application that is already clearly built the wrong way.
Right. So, and that's actually,
the right way is.
that's actually exactly how I learned Ruby on Rails. I was reverse engineering something, and it's a whole lot easier to fire up a brand new hello world right from a demo, right, than to try and go and learn reading all this messy, crazy code, right? So one thing that I would really say is in VS Code, if you're using VS Code, you can usually command click on something, and it will take you back to the source. Also, make friends with Command Shift F, right? Because what you want to do is every time you come across something that you're not familiar with and you need to just trace it back, like you have to learn how to trace back every time you see a tag in the HTML that you're not familiar with, go search for it in the code base and try to find it. Get familiar with the inputs and the outputs, the event emitters, and also, yeah, definitely study RxJS. But inputs, outputs, learn how to find something in the code base and search for it, and RxJS.
All right, thanks. Other questions?
So this one has two parts that are semi-related. The first one is specifically testing RxJS. I was curious as to what you guys use for that. I've messed with Jasmine Marbles, but testing RxJS in general just sucks. Testing observables kind of sucks. And the usual solution I've seen in companies is to just not do it and say, well, testing observables is horrible, so we'll do that later. And the second is, if you guys know about the architecture that Todd Motto with the Ultimate Angular program has taught and what your opinions on that are.
Was that I didn't quite hear that second question.
There's a website called Ultimate Angular that a guy named Todd Motto has done tutorials.
Yeah, we know all about Todd Motto.
No, we like Todd. His body maybe doesn't. We like Todd.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Testing, I've heard everybody talking about Cypress.io. A lot of people that are into NGRX and RxJS are loving Cypress.io, and I actually have not had a whole lot of time to dive into it, but that's creating a lot of buzz. So if you're into testing or if you need to be into testing, you should be looking at Cypress.io because everybody loves it for some reason.
So to answer your question with the tools that are kind of in the box, so we actually have a whole bunch of steps on testing, and specifically testing with observables in our Angular bootcamp. Shameless plug once again.
You're gonna make me not invite you guys back. You keep this up.
I mean, keeps doing it, kind of happy, right? Okay. But to answer your question, like the easiest thing to do is to look at your observable pipelines and ask yourself, what is it that I'm actually trying to test here, right? Because very frequently what you'll find is that the thing that you're actually trying to test is, whatever functions you're passing to the operators. And so a lot of times if you just extract those functions out into standalone functions and then test those, then you can, unit test your observable pipelines without actually having to set up any kind of machinery, right? But if you are needing to test that observable machinery, there are tools built into the Angular CLI that let you do that. So the async and fake async functions basically let you, either tell Angular, hey, wait until all the observables are done to finish the tests, and then you can test with that. And fake async actually lets you take control of the clock and say, okay, I want 249 milliseconds to pass so I can test that my debounce worked, right? But even as I give that example, right, that's an example of where what am I actually testing there? Well, I'm actually testing RxJS, so that's not really a good unit test. So start off by asking yourself, what actually am I trying to test here, and can it be extracted somehow from my pipeline into a more synchronous form so that I don't have to deal with observables? And then if it really can't, then making use of those in the box, async and fake async functions.
All right, so let's go ahead and move on to another question here before this way black box versus gray box debate. All right, other questions? Gentleman right here, we're going to do this as the last question, and then we can, of course, talk afterwards.
And I will say, while I have the mic, that if you are curious about jasmine marbles, Bonnie's daughter gave a talk at Ng-Conf this past year of a fun talk on jasmine marbles, so that could be good to see.
Yeah, I guess two parts. One, it seems like you guys kind of touched on it, like the last couple, that was kind of throwing me off. Anyway, it seems like the last couple Angular releases have kind of been smaller tooling kind of based and improvements. Other than Ivy, do you guys see anything kind of major coming forefront, or do you see it kind of being more minor polishing? And related note, as far as like the data access stuff, do you guys see much major coming there, or is it just kind of all consolidating around like NGRX or something like that?
So Bonnie, if you couldn't hear it, the two questions were, other than Ivy, anything big coming in the Angular space, and in the data state management space, anything new there, or is it kind of starting to clump around NGRX?
So
the biggest thing that I would say, the biggest focus that I've seen from the Angular team is not necessarily cool new features other than, elements, Bazel, co-design we love, but really what they're doing, what they seem to be really focused on is making Angular faster and easier without breaking anything. And really I love it, right? Because there might not be new things coming out that comes out. They're just really trying to make it backwards compatible. They're trying to make the fastest things, the best things available by default without you guys doing anything. So I love that that's their focus. Yeah, there was something else, but I forgot. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Jack?
So is this gone? Okay. So to answer the first question, the thing that I'm most excited about is the improvement in ergonomics, like Bonnie was kind of saying, of actually writing Angular code. So, in this past year, they added in, provided in for services. So you don't actually have to specifically, put your services into a module. You can just kind of have them floating out there. And there has actually been, the Angular team has been talking about eventually being able to do away with ng modules entirely, which would remove a whole lot of overhead for kind of setting up your Angular application. So that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to. So to answer your second question about state management in your Angular applications, we have had days, maybe weeks worth of talking amongst ourselves about months about where that's going and how that works. So the short answer is that NGRX is kind of like the ultimate solution right now in terms of like what people are going to be talking about and the model that people are going to be using. And we love our NGRX, so we use it very heavily. But we've often found that as you kind of go through your Angular state management journey, there's a number of stages that you go through. Eventually, they lead to NGRX. But
all roads
once
lead to NGRX.
Yes, but once you get there and you understand what it's doing and why it's doing it, you can actually kind of then walk backwards through that trail and then start thinking a little bit more critically about, well, do I actually need NGRX for this problem? Is this a NGRX-shaped problem? And so our advice to students, or at least what I usually tell my students in the Angular Bootcamp, is start with NGRX, and then once you feel comfortable there and you understand what's going on and why it's happening, and you really feel like you have a mastery, then you can start looking at maybe walking back from it a little bit. So for right now, NGRX is kind of like the model, but as people get more comfortable with it and they get more advanced and things like reactive programming become more entrenched in the minds of people who are writing these things, you might see that actually falling a little bit out of favor.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing to that. Ng-Conf is coming up. And Aaron Frost, he's actually one of the organizers. He's also going to be giving a talk. And if I remember correctly, his talk's actually pretty much on the, I believe on what Jack just mentioned, which was kind of, evaluating with critical eye the use of NGRX and possibly alternatives to it. I believe that's the talk if I remember correctly. So check that out, coming up pretty soon as well. All right, Bonnie, we've kept you too long.
Hold on. I have two more things real quick on state management.
Okay,
we have time?
go ahead.
That's what I was going to say earlier and I forgot. Okay, so two things. Number one, if you like NGRX, but there's a lot of boilerplate, there is also NGXS, which is very much worth looking into. It's very similar to NGRX, but it's like a lightweight version of NGRX. It doesn't work exactly the same under the hood, but for your purposes, it's very, very similar, but less boilerplate, which a lot of people seem to like. The other thing is there is, as far as patterns, state management patterns, Thomas Burleson wrote an article about a facade pattern that basically goes on top of the NGRX specs, and I love it, and I think it's beautiful. So if you're a fan of state management, you should check out that article by Thomas Burleson, the facade pattern.
All right, thank you. Well, we're going to go ahead and, pardon me, wrap up here. Of course, you're welcome to stay, hang out, ask some questions. A couple of housekeeping notes. I just wanted to thank our sponsors, Savvy Coders, for the use of the space, and then Oasis Digital for the live stream, food, drink, dessert. So give them a big round of applause, and as well as a round of applause for our panelists. And then a couple of notes about the meetup itself. Now that we've rebooted, we're going to try and keep this at a cadence like once a month. Not quite sure. We haven't locked down a recurring location yet. So if you actually know of a space that can hold 50 to 100 people, that would let us have food and kind of have a regular meeting schedule, come talk to me. We're still shopping around. Other than that, I also wanted to plug the third Wednesday of every month. Oasis Digital hosts Angular Lunch. And so we're going to be kind of working together to keep speakers provided at both Angular Lunch Meetup. It starts at noon, third Wednesday of every month.
Where?
It's at 1630 DePere Road in DePere.
And then far from here.
Yeah.
Way west.
All right, so thanks again, everyone, for coming. Thanks on the live stream, and we'll talk again soon.
Bye.
Bye,
Thanks
Bonnie.
for having me.
Bye, Bonnie.